Alright, so here we are back again, and something I've been meaning to do for a while, and it's got to the stage now where I need to definitely do it today, because explain why in a moment. So what I've been thinking about for a while now is to do a quick video. None of my videos are ever quick, are they? Try and do a video to tell you what I feel the pros and cons of the tr-usdx from Manuel and crew, Manuel and Guido, and the Chinese clone USDXs. Laying cards on the table, I only ever owned one of these white button USDXs. I haven't owned the brick or the red corner. I would like to get my hands on a red corner at some point. So I can only really speak from the point of view of the white button, but from what I can understand, they're all pretty much the same and using the same software and pretty much the same hardware as well. So just thought I'd get that interview open first of all. So what are my experiences and what do I think of both of the two different radios? Well, for a start, the build quality. The build quality on the tr-usdx is definitely superior than the build quality on the Chinese clones. These are made in China too, but they're made by an approved supplier who's undergone some quality assurance checks with Manuel and Guido, and they're happy to endorse this product from their approved supplier. I think his name's Sunny. If you look on Manuel's website, there's quite a bit about it. So that's probably the first thing to mention. The build quality is far superior on this. There's a very good chance that if you buy one of these, when you unpack it, it's going to work. If you buy one of these, it's a bit of a lottery. It may work, and it might work great for you guys, and it might carry on working without any problems. But I do feel it's a lottery, and I have read a lot of things. On my one, it was full of really poor soldering, solder splashes, various bits and pieces which I've made various videos on, and that was probably the biggest problem I had with that. I will add that I paid slightly less for this radio than I did for the tr-usdx. And because I had a problem with this radio, I did manage to get a £50 refund, which was half the price of a radio. So in effect, this only cost me 50 quid as opposed to about £112 I think I paid all in for the tr-usdx. So you have to bear that in mind with the quality control. But if you're not a guy who wants to play around with radios and get inside it with a soldering iron, etc., you just want it to work as a radio from the box, then you're going to want to buy one of these. From a quality point of view, from an operational point of view, operation is probably not the right word, but from a point of view of usability straight out the box, this is the one you're probably going to want to buy. You are taking a risk if you buy one of the Chinese versions, cloned copies, whatever you want to call them. So that's probably the first thing to mention. Another thing is the display. Now, the display on this is really bright. I think it's an OLED display, really bright, compared to the LCD displays on the Chinese clones. That said, for me, I'm an old git, and for me, these displays are just too small. They just do my head in. I have to take my glass. I'm at the stage of my eyesight where I have to put glasses on to look at small items. So for me, it was a pain in the butt every 2 minutes having to put my glasses on to look at the display and then take them off to do something else. That's just a personal thing. I guess if you wear glasses all the time, or your eyesight's perfect, maybe it won't bother you. But for me, it was a big problem, a pain in the butt having to keep on taking the glasses on or off. these are brighter, the displays are brighter. One thing to mention as well, that the displays on these are slightly dimmer if you use the USB input on the side. We'll come to the DC supply issues in a minute, but just something worth mentioning, that they are slightly dimmer if you do use a USB on the side. There is a modification online to eliminate that difference, or pretty much improve it, but I haven't bothered with this. I haven't touched this. I've never even had cause to modify this in any way. Chinese display. This display is just too small for me. On these, it's just too small. I did another video, a YouTube video, where I show you my homemade receiver, or rehoused receiver should I say, where I've rehoused the motherboard out of this, the main board out of this, into another one and put a bigger display on it. That suits me. I found this display annoyingly small, but it was functional. It told you what you needed to know. So that's the display, as he ticks that one off his checklist. Okay, we just touched on this. DC in. The nice thing about these tr-usdx's, it's got two ways of feeding it. First of all, you can just feed it with a USB, or you can feed it with the DC jack. The company who sell them, the endorsed company, supply you with a lead with the correct jack plug to match that socket. It's quite a small one. When you use the USB port to power this receiver, you're only getting well less than a watt out. I think it's about half a watt on most bands, but it's great. I've used it quite a bit as a receiver rather than a transmitter, and it was convenient to have that USB port in the side. And another thing as well, worth mentioning, that the PA stages in these receivers, in these transceivers, apparently are very robust at that sort of voltage and current level. So if you power it up with USB, it doesn't really matter what you hang on the end of it. You're not going to knacker the output finals. The BS170 FETs. When you power this up with the DC port on the side, there you go. When you use that port on the side, you get full power out of it. You can leave them both plugged in, and it just basically operates from the DC port, regardless of whether you've got power up to the USB or not. So when you plug your 13.8 into here, or 12.8 from your car battery, or whatever it is, this will take over regardless of power going into that port. On this radio, on the white button radio, you've got two DC jacks on the back. I can't show you because I've used the back plate on my other radio, but you've got two DC jacks on the back. One is for DC input for operation, and the other is for charging. I don't think personally the way it's been designed is correct. If you leave a battery on the inside of the, if you install a battery option on this, there is a connector on the main board to put a battery. If you install that battery and you're operating by battery, and then you put in the DC supply, it doesn't disconnect the battery, I've discovered. Now we all know we're using lithium-ion batteries, that is a disaster waiting to happen. So for me, I've put an isolation switch on the back of mine so I can disconnect the battery when operating from the main DC input. I've noticed, I think it's the black brick model, I've noticed that has got a DC isolation switch. So somebody has thought about this at some point, but for whatever reason, when you put a battery in this, it's not disconnected when you use the main DC input jack. So that's just something worth mentioning in mind. Another thing worth mentioning is that when you buy this radio, it comes with a little plug top charger, which which I can't see at the moment. It comes with a little plug top charger with a European 2-pin plug on it, and it will happily power the radio via the charge port when you get it. But it's worth mentioning you'll have about S5 of noise on all of the bands if you use that charger. It's as noisy as hell. I tried putting ferrite beads and stuff on it, but it's just rubbish. Absolute rubbish from a noise point of view. Great at charging your battery once you put batteries inside. It's got a red LED on it to tell you it's charging, and that turns green when the batteries are fully charged. So from that point of view, it's pretty good. So that's for DC supplies. Another feature which is really good on this radio, I understand, looking through various forums, that these radios can you can change not only the firmware, but you can make some hardware additions to incorporate this feature. But at the moment, they haven't got it as standard, and that is the VSWR bridge and power measurement in this. It's excellent. It is a really, really good feature, and in all honesty, I've used this radio more as an aerial antenna tuner than I have a radio. Up until recently, I didn't have a power meter or a reasonable VSWR meter, and running it on low power via the DC jack, I found this to be a brilliant tool for trimming antennas, and that's what I've used, and measuring power. That's what I've used it for more than a usable transceiver. I thought that was an excellent feature, and it's something which is sadly lacking on the Chinese clones. It measures efficiency. You've got options in the menu. You can measure efficiency, VSWR, power reflected, power forward. It's a very, very nice feature, and Manuel and Guido have done really well to incorporate that in that radio. Rob, can't think of his name, his call sign, GWARDI, who wrote the software which caused all the contention between various people. His software does bring up a menu for a VSWR bridge on the on these radios, but the hardware isn't there to make use of it. Okay, so now the biggest thing about these radios, and I'll probably pause the video in a minute and do some demonstrations, but one of the biggest things for me was the discovery that, not really a discovery, so everybody tells you need an amplified speaker to use this radio. Once you go above, I think it's about volume level 6 or 7 using this, the internal speaker, which is driven straight from the processor chip, I believe, causes a microphonic vibration on the chip, and it all starts sounding horrible, howling, and loads of the reviews, and if you talk to people who have got these, they all say that one of the big problems with them is when you wind up the volume, you'll find that they start to feedback. It sounds like feedback, but it's actually a microphonic feedback, it's a vibration from the speaker, I believe, causing it. So you have to use a amplified speaker. I use this one, just a real cheap piece of crap off of eBay. I think it cost me about £3, and you charge it up with the USB. It's got a little internal 3.7 volt battery. You charge it up from the USB, and fortunately it's the same USB I'm going to say USB-B. I think it is USB-B, isn't it? Port. So it's the same plug as what's in the radio, so it's quite convenient. I just used a phone charger to charge this radio, to charge this speaker when it needed it. Plugged it into the audio jack, 3.5mm jack, and away I went. So it's fine. And automatically, I was doing the same thing with the white button. I was using the same speaker, and then I come to discover that the chip they use in the white button, which isn't incorporated, it's not used in the tr-usdx. It's an XPT6871 audio chip, and I believe they've used it in bridge mode. It's a stereo audio chip. I think they've used it in bridge mode to get a bit of power out of it. That's what they use in the white button, and you really don't need one of these or an amplified speaker. I'll demonstrate that to you in a moment. Let's see if we can find a station. It's the middle of the day and I'm on 20 meters, so there's not a lot going on. There you go, 40 meters. We could probably hear a signal on 40.
And Bulletin. All the best, and 73. G4 ETG portable. TR, India, Charlie, Romeo.
Unfortunately, we just got
Thank you, 73 and CQ40.
Oh, here we go.
ICR listening.
So, I've got an internal speaker in this radio. Incidentally,
Lima X-ray 2, Romeo Lima 4.
Incidentally, this radio is the white button. Basically, I've taken the board out of the white button, put it in a case with a larger display. There's a separate video on that, so I'm not going to go into that right now. But this is the internal speaker, and I'm using the external speaker jack on the back to power this driver. It's out of this, a car audio driver. So this is the speaker coming straight off of the radio.
I wish you 73. Have a great weekend, and thank you so much for the call. LX2, Romeo Lima portable, M0 ICR. Flight 3, Japan Delta, Florida Mobile. Thank you so much, Remy. Bye-bye, 73 and CQ40. Flight 0, India, Charlie Romeo, CQ. Flight 3, Japan Delta, Florida Mobile. CQ40, CQ40.
So you see from that, you do not need an amplified speaker if you use one of these clones. The audio chip in these radios is more than capable. I think that's a 20 or 30 watt rated unit, and it drives that perfectly. Obviously, there's not sort of that power level coming out of the radio, but it does drive it very easily. So that's probably the first thing to mention. That is an advantage with the Chinese radios. The audio output is far superior. I'm not knocking this. It is what it is. I hate that expression. It is what it is. But basically, this was never designed, I believe, to drive a loudspeaker. The loudspeaker was a bit of an afterthought. So I'm not knocking it. I'm just pointing out that if you buy one of these, you need an amplified speaker. If you buy something like this for Chinese clones, the chances are, if it's got its own output IC in, like this one has, then you won't need to have an amplified speaker. In fact, you're doing yourself an injustice by using an amplified speaker, unless it was a great quality, because the output from this is far inferior to the output directly from the speaker. So that's something worth bearing in mind, the audio and the speaker. Now, another thing as well is the noise on receive. It might just be a calibration thing, I don't know. But for example, if I go to, I'm going to have to pause in a minute so I can demonstrate this. Let's unplug my aerials. So let's go to a blank frequency on 40. Okay, and I'm going to turn the camera around. Okay, so according to that, I've got about S4 of noise. Another nice thing as well, you can flick through the options and it will give you in dBm. But anyway, I've got S4 of noise showing using the S meter. S4 of noise showing. I'm just going to pause the camera and I'll be right back. I'll be back. Okay, so we're now back. Oh, sorry about that. Am I still recording? Yeah. So on the tr-usdx, it's showing me at the moment S5, but it was, when I first got up, it was on S6 actually, but it's dropped to S5 now. I do notice that the background, here we go, it's switching there between S5 and S6. I do notice that the background noise on this seems to be higher. There we go. Right, so it's just something worth mentioning. It could just be a calibration thing. It could be some changes in the software. Maybe this one is maybe the Chinese one's giving me incorrect readings. Maybe this one's reading low. I sort of suspect it's this one a little bit high. It seems to be consistently higher than what's that? It seems to be consistently higher than the Chinese radio, clone radio. I keep on saying Chinese, but as we know, they're all Chinese. So that's just something worth mentioning. Let's listen to the audio. Let's just turn this off, which is something else I want to demonstrate in a moment, but we'll come to that in a minute. Let's just turn the audio up on this.
Nice to hear you. G4XAX, M0ICR. Cheers, 73 Golf 0 Oscar Kilo Sierra. Golf 0 Oscar Kilo Sierra. And G0PTU.
So it's quite a nice, it works, there's no doubt about it, it works very well. The audio isn't brilliant. So let's just do a comparison. If I can find my jack lead. I think that was just telling me the battery had gone flat.
Sorry, Tom. Thank you, 73. QRZM0ICR listening. G0PPU call. G0PPU, nice to hear you, 5 and 9. 5 and 9 also. He's having a nice day down there? Yeah, very good day, thank you. Sat in the air-conditioned shack, nice and cool. I went out into the garden a little bit earlier.
Cool. Air-conditioned shack, how the other half live?
I've got a list of jobs to do.
Right,
and,
so that's
has given me a 1400 cut-off, so just wrapping things up on the radio. Lots of stations still calling.
We're taking the S9 to 10 over on the tr-usdx.
Lovely signal here in Crewe,
nice and clear using that.
Mike 0 India Charlie Romeo. Yes, G0
So we'll just kill that for a moment, and we'll come back onto the other radio. That worked well, didn't it? There we go. Now that's another feature I like about the Chinese as well. But let me just...
Charlie Alpha Romeo Lima. Running an Icon 7600 into a dipole. M3 EMK M0ICR. M3 XNK M0 ICR. Good afternoon, Carl. My name's Neil. I'm in Dudley in the Midlands, Sugar Oscar 98. And you're 5'9" plus about 45 to 50 dB over. My wife's vacuuming in the background.
I wish mine would.
Good, Carl. You've got a few more callers, so I'd call them if I was you. There's a few more, but a massive signal, Carl, over. Yeah, roger. Well, thanks for that. It's good to know.
Right, well I would say it's a more realistic meter reading.
It's good to know it's getting out. Thank you for the call, Neil. Have a great weekend.
But that's just my opinion. So there you are. So that's something I feel is worth mentioning, the S meter readings. Probably doesn't bother a lot of people. You know, everybody these days seems to say, what's your call sign again? Sorry, what's your call sign? I ask, and then they finally get the other person's call sign and say, yeah, you're 5'9" plus. What is that all about? However, I just thought I'd mention that. So The other thing as well, I like some of the firmware features on the Chinese radio. Right, I'm going to demonstrate what I mean. So we'll push that in there, just come away. So if I push the encoder in, wind it back, it switches my radio off. I can then hold the menu button and it switches it back on again. That's interesting, hasn't it? I've lost my S meter by doing it like that. It must have restored defaults. So that's interesting. I didn't know it did that. So it must restore a default setting on the S meter when you do it like that. I've never known that. I didn't realise that happened. It's not a hard thing to resolve. Go through the menus. S meter, we're on dBm. Press that S. There we go. So we're back to S meter. So just something worth mentioning. And the last thing I'm going to mention, because I want to wrap this video up now, we're nearly up to 30 minutes. The last thing I'm going to mention is the most obvious one, and I understand exactly the reasoning behind it, but the case. If you pay for the case on this, you're getting a 3D printed case, and I totally understand why that was part of the design criteria. Well, I think I do. The idea was that with the plans, anybody can make one of these and replicate this radio for a small amount of cost, relatively small cost, and that included the case. So if you had a 3D printer, or you knew somebody who had a 3D printer, you got the files from the website or from Manuel, and you can create your own case. So I totally get why it was designed like this. From my point of view, this case isn't that nice to use. That's my point of view, and I think I'm entitled to that. It's functional, and I think it certainly serves the initial sort of design criteria that you could create a radio, use it as a radio straight from the box, or create your own at a very cost-effective price. They are a very cost-effective radio, let's be honest. Both are, but for me, I preferred the aluminium housing on this, and I think I prefer even more so the pictures I've seen anyway of the red corner. I think that's probably an even nicer case, but it's horses for courses, isn't it? And by no way do I want to be seen as knocking the case on this. It was a personal thing for me. I just feel that yes, this is a great case and it does what it's set out to do, but for me, I just needed something a bit more substantial, which I've now changed anyway, and this is what I'm using now. But once again, just to clarify, this radio is basically that radio. I've just rehoused it and modified a few things, but the board is still the same. So there you are. Right, so I'm going to bring the camera back round. Oh, okay. So one last thing I guess I should mention is that if you buy one of the Chinese ones, whether that's what's known as a red corner, a black brick, or white button, or whatever you buy from Alibaba, AliExpress, Banggood, where I bought that one from, wherever you buy these radios from, do not expect any support. You're on your own. Once that thing arrives through your letterbox, you are on your own. I consider myself to be exceptionally lucky that I lodged a fault report within a couple of days of getting it, and then really got on their case after a week or so, and eventually they offered me half of my money back. I think if I'd left it a couple of weeks or so, I'd have been pissing in the wind. I don't think I would have got a penny back. So that's worth mentioning. You get absolutely zero support if you buy one of these radios. They sent me various things. I'll try this, try that, but it was all nonsense. Powering it up and powering it down, and make sure the flexi connector's tight to the display, etc., etc. So you are on your own if you buy one of these. I haven't put it to the test. I believe that Manuel is an honourable man, and I'm looking through posts on the forum, on his forum, or the forum for these radios. I would say you stand a bigger chance of getting some support if you have a problem with one of these than you would if you had a problem with the Chinese clone. I've also read and seen a video, I think, on YouTube of a guy who bought one of these tr-usdx's from the approved supplier, and he did have a few problems, quality problems, but they were quickly resolved, and they even offered to send him a new board. So that's not going to happen with the Chinese clones. I even asked them, in part of our discussions, I even said to them, look, just send me a new board. Don't worry about sending me it out of the case. Just send me a bare bones board and I'll be happy. And they couldn't even do that. So I think that's worth consideration if you're going to buy one. If you're not hands-on and you don't want a load of hassle, buy one of these. It's going to save you a lot of hassle in the long run. These are a very, very capable little radio. I'm absolutely full of admiration for the people who have come up with it, and I think it achieves everything they set out to achieve, I think, and more. I think it's a great radio. I've had a lot of fun with it. My personal choice, because I'm a DIYer, I love modifying things, I love building things. For me, I think I'm biased probably for the Chinese clone, because for me it's given me a great base for another radio to build. Saying that, there's absolutely no reason why I couldn't have done the same thing with this. Let's be totally honest. The good thing about the white buttons or the Chinese clones is most of them are 8-band, whereas these ones are, I think, 4-band. You have to buy another option with these. The RF board is different if you want the classic band or the walk bands. So I guess another pro for the Chinese radios is that you do get all the bands. However, like most things, there's a caveat coming, isn't there? That is the power levels. The power levels on this is consistent. I'm getting about 5.5 watts across all of the bands on this radio. That's on full voltage, obviously. That is very consistent, and I've checked and double checked that. On this little boy, I'm only getting about 3, maybe 3.5 watts out of this. I've got some voltage levels I took yesterday. The band with the highest output, and this is a shocker, because everything you read online about these Chinese radios is that 10 meters is the worst band, but for me 10 meters was actually the band with the slightly highest output. 18 megahertz was about 3 watts, 14 megahertz was about 3.5 watts, 7 megahertz was just below 3 watts, and 80 meters was just below 3 watts. And poor old 15 meters, I was down to sort of nothing-ish there, 11.5 volts. I can't remember what that works out to now, but it's not a lot. Probably a couple of watts on 15. Doesn't really bother me because I'm going to start work on the notch filters soon and have a look at what I can do to even it up a bit. But out of the box, the Chinese radio is much lower power than the tr-usdx. So something worth thinking about. It's interesting in the specs of the white button, and it says up to 5 watts. Whereas this is putting out a minimum of 5 watts on all bands. That's something worth considering. I believe I think it was the Red Corners put out a fair bit more. I think they've got a different PA stage. I think they use an IR350 or a bigger, chunkier FET rather than the 3 BS170s. So I'm going to wrap it up now. I hope that's been some, even if you've only gleaned one thing out of all of this. Hopefully it's been useful to you. If you're going to buy one, or you've been like me for ages, I was sort of hovering: do I buy one or do I not buy one? Do I put the money into something else? If you're like me at that point, and you're at that point, then hopefully this has been a little bit of a help to you. And I guess to sum it up, if you want it to work, and you want it to work straight out the box, buy yourself one of these. If you're happy to take a bit of a gamble and you want more bands, buy one of these. I guess that's all I can say, really. Hopefully that's been some help. Hopefully I'll catch you on the band soon. Cheers.